When discussing UFO legacy programs, I aim to expose any clandestine black-budget U.S. government military intelligence operation partnering with defense contractors, federally funded research and development centers, and university-affiliated research centers engaging with non-human technology. These programs seem to take many forms, including crash recovery of non-human vehicles, material exploitation of technologies of unknown origin, reverse engineering of anomalous craft, and construction of copycat vehicles famously known as alien reproduction vehicles (ARVs). On this channel, we have discussed myriad major range and test facility bases and defense laboratories and centers where such programs are likely located. We have also discussed at length contractors, FFRDCs, and UARCs that are alleged to operate alongside the CIA and NSA across Army, Navy, and Air Force UFO programs. When such clandestine and secretive operations to master non-human technology have led to, in David Grush's words, a multi-decade secret Cold War, where might these programs be located? The logistics of maintaining secrecy and strict need-to-know access for unacknowledged special access programs focused on anomalous research, development, test, and evaluation of non-human technologies and storage of non-human craft and possibly biologics are likely tremendous. For this reason, we must look underground and evaluate the decades of rumors and testimonies of UFOs and deep underground military bases, or D.U.M.Bs. D.U.M.Bs have served as a continuous focus of this channel with recent discussion and direct investigation into Dugway Proving Ground, the United States' premier chemical and biological testing range, and its alleged 1,300 square mile subterranean facility and remote entrance in the desert. For this investigation, we will be continuously referencing the work of Dr. Richard Sauder and his 3 masterpieces titled Underground Bases and Tunnels: What is the Government Trying to Hide?, Hidden in Plain Sight Beyond the X-Files, and Underground and Underwater Bases. These 3 dense pieces give us keen context into subterranean bases in the form of stringent, fact-based analysis through publicly available records, FOIA documents, declassified documents, and the occasional witness testimony. Deep underground military bases do indeed exist. This is fact, and we will explore this fact today. But do these sites engage with UFO legacy programs? And if so, which DoD sites and what do they do? And could the decades of rumors regarding underground tunnels connecting these clandestine sites through an internal rail system possibly be true? Hey guys, it's UAP and thank you so very much for joining me today as we embark into the world of the subterranean to investigate D.U.M.Bs and UFOs. The subject of UFO legacy sites embedded into mountains with hidden hangars, sequestered a mile beneath the Earth's surface, or hidden anywhere out of the public and satellite view has long been a talking point of this channel and my investigations. Today, we finally look below the Earth's surface to evaluate the existence, feasibility, and operations of UFO legacy programs and deep underground military bases. To borrow from the title of the first chapter of Dr. Richard Sauder's Underground Bases and Tunnels, deep underground military bases are indeed real. Throughout this project, I will be interchangeably using the terms D.U.M.B and Subterranean Facility, or STF, the name said to me by multiple veterans who have traveled to such underground locations. And speaking of, I should mention, I have spoken to nearly half a dozen former military personnel who have traveled to STFs across the country. I try to shy away from inserting first-hand source testimony and anecdotes into my videos and let evidence and research speak for itself, so I will interject with these first-hand testimonies when and if necessary. In a 1989 speech titled Underground Facilities for Defense, Experience and Lessons, Deputy Director of Engineering and Construction for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Lloyd A. Dusha said, quote, "After World War II, political and economic factors changed the underground construction picture and caused a renewed interest to think underground. As a result of this interest, the Corps of Engineers became involved in the design and construction of some very complex and interesting military projects," end quote. In the same talk, Dusha would then go on to exclaim, quote, "Although the conference program indicates the topic to be underground facilities for defense, experience, and lessons, I must deviate a little because several of the most interesting facilities that have been designed and constructed by the Corps are still classified, end quote. Acknowledged military subterranean facilities do indeed exist. Publicly known sites include the NORAD Cheyenne Mountain Complex buried deep under Colorado Springs. This enormous installation built to monitor North American missile threats sits 2,000 feet underground and spans 5.1 acres. Featuring 6 3-story high and 40-foot wide tunnels and 15 3-story buildings made of steel plates. And these are just the acknowledged portions of the base. Additionally, the Raven Rock Complex, aka Site R, serves as a secure underground command center or backup Pentagon and is shrouded in mystery. This site under Fort Detrick, Maryland, includes accommodations for 3,000 people, has an inbuilt medical and dental clinic, fire department, post office, and 5 acknowledged 3-story buildings. The secrets Raven Rock must hold are endless. But existing acknowledged D.U.M.Bs are not the focus of today's investigation. Instead, we plan to pursue D.U.M.Bs that operate as UFO legacy program locations and explore the feasibility of decades of rumors of hundreds, if not thousands of miles of underground tunnels and railroads connecting deep underground UFO legacy operations. To once again quote U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Deputy Director for Engineering and Construction Lloyd A. Dusha, when speaking about the Corps' involvement in the 1960s construction of the Cheyenne site, quote, "As stated earlier, there are other projects of similar scope which I cannot identify, but which include multiple chambers up to 50 feet wide and 100 feet high, using the same excavation procedure mentioned for the NORAD facility," end quote. After all, according to a 1985 U.S. Army Corps of Engineers report titled Literature Survey of Underground Construction Methods for Application to Hardened Facilities, STFs can be built anywhere with the right amount of money and in myriad types of structures utilizing deep shaft structures and facilities tunneled into mountainsides. The report even states, quote, "Since adequate technology is available to construct hardened underground facilities under virtually any ground conditions, the main constraint in construction projects remains economic viability rather than technical feasibility," end quote. As we know from David Grush and multiple other sources and testimonies, UFO legacy programs operate on the U.S. black budget. Untraceable, deep-sixed money and contracts buried within special access, controlled access, and unacknowledged special access programs. From the excellent work of Catherine Austin Fitts I mention often, we also know that as much as $21 trillion in unauthorized spending has occurred between 1998 and 2015. And this is just within the DoD and Department of Housing and Urban Development, much of which Fitts believed was designated for clandestine military R&D. Publicly denied UFO research, development, test, and evaluation underground locations would absolutely classify as such. D.U.M.Bs for clandestine and unacknowledged use is also a practice very much currently in play. One such example is Warrenton U.S. Army Training Center located in the Northern Virginia town of Warrenton. The book The Secret Team, The CIA and Its Allies in Control of the World by Fletcher Prouty identified a highly secretive underground installation that serves as a federal relocation center by an unknown agency. This was confirmed in an Inquiry magazine article titled Going Underground by Robert Walters, which plainly states the U.S. Army Warrenton Training Center is a CIA covert facility. Additionally, there is the highly secretive U.S. Navy underground facility in the mountains of West Virginia near Sugar Grove. This location is an underground site run by the Navy for the National Security Agency. So the NSA and CIA already have a traceable interest in using U.S. military bases' underground facilities as a cover for unknown usage and operations. So before discussing much of the testimony of UFOs and D.U.M.Bs, let's quickly touch on the reality and history of these impressive, often unacknowledged sites. The inception of D.U.M.Bs in the United States can actually be traced back to the Nazis and Operation Paperclip, the famous program to recruit Nazi scientists, engineers, and technicians into U.S. government employment. Near the end of World War II, the Nazis had begun utilization of what we might call D.U.M.Bs. In the book Lucky Forward, The History of Patton's Third Army, Colonel Robert S. Allen detailed Allied discoveries of Nazi underground bases. Quote, "The underground installations were amazing. They were literally subterranean towns. There were 4 in and around Ohrdruf. None were natural caverns or mines. All were man-made military installations. The horror camp had provided the labor. An interesting feature of the construction was the absence of any spoil. It had been carefully scattered into hills miles away." End quote. Some Nazi installations were over 50 feet underground, comprised of several miles of 2 to 3 story facilities. The sites were arranged like wheels with spokes, designed with reinforced concrete. The Nazis designed such locations as Ohrdruf to house Nazi high command after the bombing of Berlin, but never got the chance to populate the facility. We additionally have the Regenwurm Lager, or Earthworm Camp in Poland. This Nazi sprawling underground complex beneath West Poland's full extent is still unknown today. The site featured miles of underground tunnels and electrical train lines connecting bunkers, fortifications, and other critical military facilities. This sounds familiar, no? 2 declassified documents can be discovered dating back to 1947 regarding the aforementioned Operation Paperclip. Featured in the documents are requests by Air Material Command for a quote-unquote requirement of 4 German technicians to consult on a planned underground plant program. One man named was Xavier Dorsch, director of the Todt organization in the closing of World War II. This was the Nazis' equivalent of the US Navy Seabees or US Army Corps of Engineers, but not part of formal German military structure. The founder of this organization, Fritz Todt, designed the famous German Autobahn highway system. Towards the tail end of World War II, Dorsch had helped with developing a series of massive underground industrial manufacturing facilities to hide from Allied bombing raids. It is indeed quite possible he also aided on the Regenwurm Lager and Ohrdruf. Documents and research show Dorsch once briefed the Americans after he was captured in 1945 and again in 1949. We do not know the full extent to which he aided in these programs. These massive Nazi underground industrial manufacturing facilities possibly give us our first look into UFO legacy programs and D.U.M.Bs. I have covered on this channel the 1933 Magenta, Italy UFO crash retrieval, a case whose validity is strongly supported by David Grush.
You say it's a 90-year cover-up?
Just about, yeah.
90 years?
1933 was the first recovery in Europe, in Magenta, Italy. They recovered a partially intact vehicle.
In this case, the Nazis purportedly took control of a crashed lenticular disc from the Italians in 1943 before being recovered by the Americans post-war. Hans Kammler was a Nazi engineer behind construction of numerous concentration camps including Auschwitz and led myriad Nazi secret weapons projects. Kammler would have indeed been one of chief scientists and engineers to study a recovered lenticular craft due to his unrivaled command over Nazi secret weapons programs. Kammler went missing near the tail end of World War II. However, documents prove rather convincingly this evil engineer was taken alive into US custody. Albert Speer, Nazi and Reich Minister of Armaments and War Production, claimed in April 1945 Kammler informed him he had business to offer the Americans. OSS agent Donald W. Richardson seemingly confirmed this by stating 70 years after he still couldn't fully speak on interrogating Kammler. But the Nazis had brought treasure to the US that, quote, served the development of armament platforms for the Cold War and for the future, end quote. Under Kammler's command, numerous underground tunnels and bases existed employing German companies to develop and build parts for advanced aircraft and secret weapons programs. Kammler is even said to have stashed treasures and documents regarding his think tank's top secret documents in a facility underground in the woods of Czechoslovakia. According to Hidden Nazi by Dan Reuter, 44 years after Operation Hidden Documents to retrieve these stashed top secret documents, an American team from Lawrence Livermore Labs and Los Alamos Labs, 2 FFRDCs, went to a new underground cavern that had not been emptied at the end of World War II called Mednick Hill. What was found here was, quote, the key to what was hidden at the previous site, end quote. It goes without saying it stands to reason Kammler conducted early iterations of UFO legacy programs underneath Mednick Hill, as well as his numerous underground locations and tunnels, and that Xavier Dorsch was a key engineer in constructing these facilities. With Dorsch being requested by Air Material Command and Kamler being more than likely secretly smuggled by the Americans, these two men could very well be the key architects of modern-day US, UFO, and D.U.M.B legacy programs. I am no expert in history, so to learn more about Kamler, I strongly recommend watching the documentary The Two Lives of Hans Kamler. Later in this project, we will see even more ties between Nazi Germany, D.U.M.Bs, and paperclip, then in the form of Maglev train systems. On numerous occasions in the 1950s, the United States proposed massive underground facilities that seemingly disappeared from public light. It is unknown if many of these facilities were built or not. One example can be traced to 1957 to Green Mountain outside Huntsville, Alabama. Huntsville is deeply enshrouded in US anti-gravity research, but we are looking elsewhere. Two articles in 1957 reported the US Army was planning to build a rocket factory inside of Green Mountain. The plan was proposed by the American Machine and Foundry Company, Redstone Arsenal, and the Army Ballistic Missile Agency. This location was slated to have a sort of subterranean junior Pentagon, where elaborate headquarters would be installed to direct the defense of the southern US from enemy attack. Again, it is unknown if this location was ever built. However, such discussion of a junior Pentagon illustrated early private military cooperation, a theme we will touch on much later. Analysis of US military and underground studies additionally allows us valuable insights into D.U.M.Bs. Take the RAND Corporation, for example. An FFRDC I have spoken about ad nauseum is a primary semi-government institution up to its eyeballs in UFO legacy programs. RAND Corporation was established in 1948 and grew out of Army Air Force Project RAND in 1946. Project RAND sought to carry out long-range research projects of interest to the Air Force. In the 1950s, USAF and RAND began working on the question of underground base construction and organized various symposiums. Let's analyze a resulting 1959 publication, Deep Underground Construction. The purpose of such a symposium, according to the chairman, was to discuss, quote, the problems of protecting military installations located deep underground or under mountains, end quote, in the event of nuclear war. The chairman also stated since 1957, the RAND Corp had been, quote, actively investigating the need for a small number of super hard deep underground centers, end quote. Additionally, in 1960, RAND published a study under USAF contract dealing 12 locations for underground sites. All sites were assumed to be more than 1,000 feet deep. Of specific interest here is Site 3 in Santa Barbara, California. Santa Barbara is located just over 100 miles from the Antelope Valley, California, we will discuss later. Research suggests a major network of UFO-focused STF facilities exists interconnected under the Antelope. Site 3 is also located less than 100 miles away from Los Angeles, where a tremendous amount of DoD research development test and evaluation laboratories lie. We have already mentioned the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers giving in 1989 a quite frank admission of classified underground facilities. And outside of the 1987 U.S. Army Corps of Engineers report detailing construction of D.U.M.Bs boils down to cost, in 1959 to 1961, the Army Corps of Engineers published a 5-part training manual titled Design of Underground Installations in Rock. This startling series assumes the pre-existence of underground facilities. The report states, quote, vital government installations have been placed underground as exemplified by the Ritchie Project, end quote. Many of these facilities were designed as command and control centers and survival bunkers for nuclear attacks. These are known as continuity of government sites. Raven Rock qualifies as one such continuity of government or COG D.U.M.B. Design of underground installations in rock additionally makes some statements of extreme relevance to the testimonies of D.U.M.Bs and UFOs. Some installations listed by the Army were to be shallow, while, quote, more important equipment and facilities essential to defense may be installed in deeper workings that are likely to be long and tunnel-like, occupying one or several stories, end quote. The report detailed enormous underground facilities featuring 50 by 50 feet tunnels and chambers as much as 100 feet high, even stating, quote, truck or rail traffic might be important, end quote. The Army even cautioned, quote, landscape scars, roads, and portal structures, aka entrances, should be as inconspicuous as possible. Camouflage should be considered, end quote. This is of extreme consequence when discussing testimonies such as MS, who detailed the entrance to the Dugway STF as a small building in the middle of nowhere. In 1963, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers published a manual titled Utilization of Nuclear Power Plants in Underground Installations. This manual discussed self-contained nuclear-powered underground facilities with button-up diesel secondary systems. Critically, in 1964, the Army Corps of Engineers, or COE, proposed 12 massive structures to be built up to 4,000 feet underground. There are two sites here of massive importance to our investigation. One facility below Yuma County, Arizona, to be accessed via a vertical or inclined shaft. Such entry points are common amongst claims of UFO D.U.M.Bs, such as the Dugway D.U.M.B, whose entrance is purported to be a vertical elevator shaft. In Stephen Greer's DPI archive, who fans of this channel will know I have extracted a tremendous amount of information and worthwhile investigation from, Witness 10773 statement reads, quote, knows of massive research and storage facility, material of unknown origin at Yuma Proving Ground, end quote. Fascinating connection here. Yuma Test Center is also home to Yuma Proving Ground, a U.S. Army major range and test facility base, similar to Dugway Proving Ground's Army MRTFB, the West Desert Test Center. Yuma Proving Ground is also run by Army Test and Evaluation Command. Indeed, it is no stretch to assume if a STF exists under one of these Army MRTFBs, an equally impressive facility likely exists below the other. Second here is Site 3 in Inyo County, California, to be accessed via inclined shaft. Inyo County resides on the inside boundary of China Lake Naval Weapons Testing Facility. China Lake is one of the Navy's premier major range and test facility base and a location spoken of on myriad occasions as an underground legacy program location. China Lake really needs no introduction, but stay tuned as we will discuss China Lake in much more detail along with Antelope Valley. But quickly to mention, Dr. Richard Sauder received testimony from a Navy contact who served at China Lake. The witness confirmed an impressively large and deep installation, claiming the facility extends 1 mile deep and contains, quote, weapons more powerful than nuclear weapons, end quote. Alongside the U.S. Army COE, the U.S. Navy is also deeply entwined with underground and possibly undersea bases, but that's another story for another day. In 1972, Naval Facilities Engineering Command issued a report titled Subsurface Deployment of Naval Facilities, discussing several Navy installations to be placed underground. These include administration, medical, aircraft maintenance, ammo storage, and miscellaneous storage facilities. The U.S. Navy Seabees additionally maintain underground installations between the Presidential Camp David and CIA facility Camp Peary, which we will discuss later on. In 1947, U.S. Air Materiel Command requested Nazi technicians for construction of underground facilities. In 1989, Lloyd Dusha admitted numerous underground installations existed and were classified. This means STFs of interest were built from 1947 to 1949, a 42-year period. We can also assume some facilities were built before 1961, where the 5-part Army COE document assumes the existence of such facilities. One such example here may be Groom Lake Area 51 that was built in the 50s on the site of a former boron mine. After all, a 1991 DARPA report details secret cavities may be found in conjunction with underground mines. However, due to the existence of literature on described future plans for massive bases post-1961 that really hold our interest, we can assume from 1961 to 1989, the majority of our STFs of interest were constructed. D.U.M.Bs are not a new subject to the study of UFOs or my channel. I myself have talked a tremendous amount of the alleged DARS, Defense Advanced Research Center, a 10-story underground location built under Area 51 relayed by USAF Master Sergeant Edgar Fouché that dealt with alien reproduction vehicles including the TR-3B. I have also spoken on the enigmatic Northrop Tejon, Lockheed Helendale, and McDonnell Douglas RCS facilities that have since at least 1987 been accused by excellent researchers such as Bill Hamilton as housing UFO legacy programs, and don't worry, we will touch on these facilities in much more detail later. Quite recently, I've discussed the Dugway D.U.M.B as relayed by witness MS and even provided images and details of the exact alleged entrance to the facility, which exists as an elevator shaft concealed by a tiny building in the middle of nowhere Dugway near German Village. As strange as that might seem, a 1991 paper issued by DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, and U.S. Army Missile Command titled Development of Inspection and Detection Techniques for Hidden Cavities. This document served to train field nuclear weapons inspectors to identify underground clandestine test complexes in developing nuclear nations. The report plainly states buildings of various size can provide cover for shafts or other openings to a secret underground cavity. Sounds similar to MS, no? And lastly, I have relayed the testimony of Randy Anderson in the underground facility under the Naval Surface Warfare Center Crane housing the alleged Off-World Technologies Division. The subject of underground UFO legacy programs rose to prominence in 1989 with the claims of Bob Lazar and reverse engineering under Site 4, as well as the Dulce base fiasco where starting in 1979 Paul Benowitz was fed disinformation of a joint human extraterrestrial base under Dulce, New Mexico. Both S4 and Dulce are worthy of further investigation. In fact, I believe S4 to be a very real location, but due to the controversy around these accounts, discussions of these sites will be largely omitted from today's discussions. The first true mention of D.U.M.Bs and UFOs I can find is from Look magazine in an article titled "Is This the Real Flying Saucer?" dated 1955. The article discussed a Canadian company constructing a flying saucer while also depicting a facility built underneath a hill with a vertical shaft to the surface allowing the departure of flying saucers. Further rumors of UFOs and D.U.M.Bs wouldn't really arise until the 1970s, so this article is indeed intriguing. Leonard Stringfield's UFO Crash Retrieval Status Reports 1 through 7 is a body of work I often praise extensively. After all, Stringfield is in my opinion one of the greatest UFO investigators of all time. His work on UFO retrieval incidents and operations span from 1978 to 1994 and relays some of the earliest mentions I can find of deep underground legacy operations. Let's briefly explore a few. One such intriguing report is an anonymous letter Stringfield received 12 February 1974. The letter highlighted secret research on UFOs taking place at a secret underground complex below Gray Army Airfield in Fort Hood, Texas. According to the witness, the complex is shared with ICBM silos built into a small mountain. This is fascinating as later in the project we will discuss how numerous D.U.M.Bs were constructed primarily as ICBM sites. The witness described a section of the mountain would open up onto a jet interceptor runway, which was once accidentally observed by a private pilot making a forced landing over this restricted air corridor. This underground facility, according to the witness, was tied with NORAD in Cheyenne Mountain, Colorado, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio, Tinker Air Force Base, Oklahoma, Carswell Air Force Base, Texas, and others. And this is where the anonymous account gets very interesting. The witness stated the complex employed a squadron of unmarked helicopters dispatched, quote, when the need arises, end quote, codenamed the Blue Boys. This sounds incredibly similar to UFO recovery rapid reaction units I have spoken about in numerous crash retrieval cases, such as the Blue Berets in the 1965 Kecksburg, Pennsylvania case. The choppers additionally carried a new type of missile the source had been informed had been used on UFOs, but a new system had been in development which would be far more efficient. This was an electronic warfare system designed to disable UFOs under quote-unquote controlled conditions. This letter would arrive to Stringfield's desk in 1974, but now in 2025 we have heard the whistleblower testimony of Jake Barber, where he discussed EMP-type weapons designed to bring down UFOs over the enigmatic range.
In your time in deployment, you met certain people from an aerospace company, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
Now, it's also part of the constraints you operate under that you can't name that aerospace company.
Correct. There's no good reason to name them, even if I wasn't constrained.
What were they doing there?
Well, they were supporting us with some new weapons technology that could be used to disable vehicles and aircraft.
I can disclose this.
Yeah.
My understanding is that they were essentially using, I think it's a matter of public record, that microwave weapons, pulse microwave weapons, were being used at that time.
Correct. There were some early prototypes that were being used at that time. And I met individuals that were there representing the companies that were providing that service to the government, made some friends, and those relationships led to opportunities later in the California desert where I began my journey.
Leonard would actually see a volume of reports regarding underground complexes at Fort Hood, including a USAF lieutenant colonel who relayed to him in 1975 of an underground project that took place at Fort Hood. In 1976, Stringfield met an individual from McGregor, Texas, who claimed his father had worked beneath Fort Hood on the UFO program. This second-hand witness relayed a quote from his father stating, quote, "The technology that is being applied in this underground complex would remind someone of a science fiction thriller. It is unbelievable what they know and what they can do from this area." Spanning the late 70s into the 80s, Stringfield received myriad reports of an underground facility beneath Wright-Patterson Air Force Base housing preserved non-human biologics. One such account was relayed from witness J.K., who worked at a Nike missile site in Wilmington, Ohio. J.K. claimed to have seen 9 alien bodies under Wright-Pat in 1966, encased in glass frozen to preserve. J.K. also claimed recovered craft were housed at MacDill Air Force Base, Langley Air Force Base, and Seymour Johnson Navy Training Center outside of Norfolk, Virginia. These locations purportedly all housed craft and sometimes biologics in underground hangars to conceal material from military and politicians. Stringfield heard similar accounts of biologics under Wright-Pat relayed secondhand from one T.S., who allegedly witnessed bodies in the early 1950s. T.S. were amongst a handful that relayed such stories. Leonard Stringfield would also once receive an anonymous, undated letter from a U.S. airman who was stationed at Kirtland Air Force Base, New Mexico. The source relayed rumors and stories of UFOs being stored in the Manzano storage area in remote Kirtland. Remember, if you will, Kirtland is home to Sandia National Labs, FFRDC, which, ranging from the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit report to accusations of reverse engineering a propulsion device for the TR-3B by Edgar Fouché, has stood as a high probability candidate in UFO RDT&E programs. Manzano Mountain Underground Facility is no myth either. While researching for his 2001 book Underwater and Underground Bases, Sauder received FOIA documents of 2 underground facilities below Manzano. While these documents of course say nothing about UFO storage, it is fascinating to see Sauder confirm the rumors of an underground installation beneath Kirtland. Lastly, I want to reference an anonymous letter to Leonard Stringfield I have covered before. This is dated March 14, 1975, which claims to recount the testimony of one Lieutenant Colonel Sims, a pseudonym. I previously discussed this letter in reference to the project on Ed. An Edwards Air Force Base 412th Test Group Electronic Warfare Test Director who claimed to the existence of a joint UFO reverse engineering program operating between Edwards Air Force Base and the Nevada Test and Training Range. Viewers of this channel will know I consider Ed to be one of the most critical UFO legacy witnesses of all time, and as a quick side note, Ed also referenced attending the S4 site. This letter was referenced due to the mention of Hanscom Air Force Base and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, an air base and university where Ed worked from 2002 to 2005 on foreign military assets. Amongst the intriguing mentions of contractors, FFRDCs, UARCs, and air bases involved in UFO research and investigation, the source relayed Lieutenant Colonel Sims speaking of several computer banks hidden within underground installations scattered across the U.S., housing sophisticated computer equipment, electronic instrumentation, and mobile radar units. According to Sims, these underground installations employ, quote, "squadrons of unmarked helicopters which have sophisticated instrumentation on board that are dispatched to areas of UFO activity to monitor these craft or airlift them out of the area if one has malfunctioned," end quote. This sounds quite similar to the Blue Boys Rapid Reaction Unit relayed to Stringfield, does it not? But perhaps we have other confirming evidence, so let's also reference the book Trinity's Children Living Along America's Nuclear Highways. The authors of this book state, quote, There are more Cray supercomputers in New Mexico, an Air Force computer expert once said, than anywhere else. They're here at the Weapons Center, referring to Kirtland. They're across the street at Sandia. They're at Los Alamos up the highway. And they're at the, quote, underground places nobody knows about. Intriguing, as we already know Kirtland and by extension Sandia employ at least 2 underground facilities in the Manzano Mountains. Los Alamos National Labs additionally employs a deep underground installation. Dr. Sauder had quite an interesting engagement with Los Alamos. He repeatedly attempted to FOIA the Department of Energy for information on underground facilities and tunnels beneath Los Alamos. The DOE continuously responded there were none. Eventually, though, the DOE provided Sauder a badly blurred phototastic copy of an article by Earl Zimmerman titled LASL's Unusual Underground Lab, which described an underground facility built in the late 1940s. This article was undated and of uncertain origin, however Zimmerman can be found labeled as a Press Bureau member from 1963 to 1965 in a 2020 Los Alamos organizational chart. Dr. Sauder additionally met with a businessman who relayed his experience in visiting Los Alamos in the company of a highly cleared associate. The businessman was privy to wherever his esteemed colleague went without question. The individual claimed 75% of Los Alamos' facilities are underground and extend as far as 1 mile underground. In relation to TUOs and UFOs, so far we have covered very real STFs under Kirtland/Sandia and Los Alamos while also discussing the possible existence of facilities existing under Wright-Patterson, Fort Hood/Gray Army Airfield, Yuma County, China Lake, as well as the Nevada test site under the Nevada Test and Training Range. Now onto one of the most critical areas of my research, the Antelope Valley, California. For this section, we will reference the work of both Dr. Sauder as well as the late Bill Hamilton, a tremendous UFO researcher. Hamilton served as a true pioneer of the field, serving as the first researcher to ever produce the term and a public image of ARV, and even handed incredible witnesses such as Mark McCandlish and Bill Uhouse to Stephen Greer. Hamilton's excellent book, Cosmic Top Secret, an ultra-rare early 1990s lecture recorded for VHS titled UFOs and Underground Bases, offers us keen insights into Hamilton's research on D.U.M.Bs and specific area of interest, the Antelope Valley. In fact, Hamilton produced a map relayed to him by sources of connected underground UFO facilities in the American Southwest. We will compare this map to existing DoD laboratories and RDT&E locations later on in this video. China Lake Naval Air Station is also quite close to Antelope Valley, so we will discuss that enigmatic facility here as well. Since the late 1980s, Hamilton's work focused on Antelope Valley, California. Many will know this region as one of the chief centers of aerospace technology, housing the infamous USAF Plant 42, Lockheed Skunk Works, the former Norton Air Force Base, the legendary Edwards Air Force Base, major installations for Northrop Grumman, Rockwell, and McDonnell Douglas, as well as numerous intriguing radar cross-section facilities in the form of Northrop Tejon, Lockheed Helendale, and McDonnell Douglas. I have spoken on all of the aforementioned facilities in prior work. Palmdale, California within the Antelope has served as an unrivaled U.S. military/private contractor classified aircraft production and maintenance location. The region has produced many of the United States' most famous advanced aerospace platforms such as the RQ-4 Global Hawk, B-2 Spirit Bomber, B-21 Raider, F-117 Nighthawk, and F-35 Lightning. The Antelope Valley and the city of Palmdale have also served as a critical pillar of my research. Whether this be Norton Air Force Base serving as the location where primary witness Brad S. observed the Fluxliner alien reproduction vehicle, witness Ed disclosing his work for the 412th Test Group serving as test director for reverse engineered vehicles out of Edwards, Edgar Fouché, who stated pilots of the TR-3B reverse-engineered Triangle ARV were plucked from the Edwards 412th Test Pilot School, or the alleged Project Red Light out of Edwards, which served to act alongside Area 51 to test reverse-engineered vehicles, very similar to the claims of Ed. Antelope Valley is the most consequential location that has ever come up in all of my research. The late Hamilton was obsessed with the radar cross-section facilities mentioned above. specifically the Northrop Tejon installation, sometimes referred to as the Tehachapi facility or anthill, due to the rumors of incredible amounts of underground tunnels beneath the installation. In my video on Northrop, I investigated this RCS facility in great detail. Thanks to the research of Dr. Sauder, we know the Northrop Tejon RCS does indeed have an underground facility, just as does Helendale and McDonnell Douglas. The question is how big, how deep, and what do they do? Some rumors persist of up to 42 levels with underground tunnels connecting the facility to Edwards and other installations. The concept of a corporate D.U.M.B should come as no surprise to anyone. In 1981, the American Telephone and Telegraph Company, yes, AT&T, revealed several underground emergency centers. Believe it or not, AT&T itself has been historically implicated in non-human technology transfer, but that is not our topic for today. These underground centers exist 40 feet below ground and feature 3-story centers with databanks, dorms, and kitchens. One such location is reported to exist in Catrone County, 180 miles near Sandia National Labs. This is not surprising. Seen from 1949 to 1993, AT&T and its subsidiary Western Electric ran Sandia National Labs at Kirtland at the order of President Harry S. Truman for the Department of Energy. Indeed, as recently as 1970, the Standard Oil Company of New Jersey operated an emergency center 300 feet underground near Hudson, New York. This location that more recently held corporate reports featured dining halls and 50 sleeping rooms for key company officials. But back to Tejon, and quickly, for those who don't know, what exactly is a radar cross-section facility? To summarize, these facilities utilize high-frequency radio waves to test aircraft's radar signatures. This military testing aids in the development of stealth technologies by reducing radar cross-section. The site features large runways and pylons raised from underground on concrete diamonds as mounting pads to blast aircraft and materials with radar. Many RCS facilities, including the 3 in Antelope Valley, saw construction during the Cold War. This led the majority of the installation being built underground to hide RCS pylons' equipment, models, and technology away from Soviet spy satellites. Numerous researchers over the years have accused the Northrop, Lockheed, and McDonnell Douglas RCS sites as integral legacy program locations focused on the downing, retrieval, and storage of non-human craft. The contentious Dr. Stephen Greer even claimed to have both knowledge of the entrance for the Anthill D.U.M.B, as well as personally been flown over these sites and observed the electromagnetic pulse weapon systems that are used to down craft.
Now, interestingly, the Senate Intelligence and Armed Services Committee and other senior officials had no idea of this. The top people in Special Forces who are outside this illegal black project system didn't know about it. I had known about it since the 90s, but I'd never, of course, flown directly over it because it's classified airspace and very sensitive. So you can see what looks like a trough and a runway. It's just where the man-made UFOs that we've been building since 1954-55 come out. They go up and they hover. They're silent. They're electrogravitic, anti-grav. The diamond on the left, you see that looks like a runway with a diamond. It's not a runway because they don't need to run and get, there's not an aerodynamic. They just go boom up. But they're placed over different diamonds. I have a whole series of video and pictures of these we don't have time to go through. And that's where they're put at various elevations and then struck with an electromagnetic weapon to see if it's hardened enough to withstand conflict, right?
When discussing the RCS facilities, and in particular Hamilton's obsession with Tejon, some may remember the XF-131 Super Sentinel. This incredible triangular ARV was drawn by forensic artist Bill McDonald and later featured in Season 1 of The X-Files. According to McDonald, the craft design was relayed to him from 2 Northrop Tejon and 2 Lockheed Helendale engineers who were jaded from the intense secrecy from which they operated. I personally have spoken to McDonald on numerous occasions regarding this triangular ARV out of the Antelope Valley and put much credence into this testimony. For years, Hamilton compiled first-hand witness testimony regarding Antelope Valley and specifically the Northrop Tehachapi site. Let's briefly investigate a few of these testimonies. A local man with property on 170th Street, west of Tejon, reported to Hamilton of the ground opening like a missile silo where a flying saucer took off. Edwards Air Force Office of Special Investigations silenced this witness. UFO researcher Dr. Richard Boylan, alongside the first-hand source of Bill McDonald, have additionally accused Tejon as a manufacturing site for reverse-engineered vehicles, including the XF-131 Super Sentinel and anti-gravity disc dubbed by Boylan the Great Pumpkin. A contractor named Chuck relayed his experience digging the underground tunnels beneath the anthill to Hamilton. This source claimed tunnels in the D.U.M.B had round doorways with few doors and red and green lights for ID and entry. An intriguing source of Hamilton claimed to have worked on Project StarTalk at Tejon. This project involved lasers in a big building underground for the purpose of constructing systems to quote-unquote bring in UFOs. The source mentions scalar technology, a concept Stephen Greer would later on discuss for decades as a weapon source to down UFOs. The StarTalk informer also claimed to work at McDonnell Douglas STF, where he observed a UFO held in an underground hangar. This name was very hard to make out by a 144p documentary, but one Hamilton informer went by the name Goburn, who claimed to work at Tejon, Helendale, and the Nevada Test and Training Range. This source relayed to Hamilton he worked with alien technology that deeply frightened him. According to the source, on-site personnel would rotate every 14 to 16 days, living and working on site. And there existed a command center under Haystack Butte which connected to the anthill. Hamilton had numerous other informers who would discuss experimental discs being flown out of Edwards Airfield, extraterrestrial discs being held under Edwards, and underground UFO work below a hangar on Edwards North Base. Many of these informants would discuss ground vehicles like electric cars within the D.U.M.Bs and maglev train systems connecting the base to others. We will of course discuss this much later on. From his data and sources, Hamilton learned of a supposed massive complex of underground facilities in the Antelope Valley engaged with UFO testing, storage, and material exploitation, all connected via tunnels and transport systems. These facilities included Tehachapi, McDonnell Douglas, Helendale, George Air Force Base, Edwards, the NASA Rocket Test Site, and China Lake. A network of joint USG and corporate facilities all connected in the Antelope Valley dedicated to the storage and exploitation of UFOs has proven to be quite a common theory since the late 80s and early 1990s work of Hamilton. I'd once again like to reference Stephen Greer witness A.H. I have discussed in multiple projects A.H., a Boeing insider with numerous connections to UFO legacy programs, has historically and likely to this day served as a primary source of information for Greer. In his 2000 tape testimony, A.H. delivered to Greer much of the information Greer still discusses to this day, including reference to a massive facility existing below Dugway. A.H. additionally discussed a complex of underground facilities near Anzo, California, just south of Antelope Valley, while also addressing a critical Northrop underground facility named, of course, Tejon.
Did he share with you any other information on other facilities that dealt with this issue in the U.S. or abroad?
Yes, he mentioned there's a base here in California near Anzo, California. And there's another base in the deserts of, I believe he said Tejon or Tejon. I believe he said Tejon, I believe. I believe that's the word that he used. There's a base near Lancaster and Palmdale area. And near, this is very funny, it's near Northrop. There's an underground area out there too that he was aware of. And but he particularly mentioned and stayed focused on Anza, California. There's some underground areas up there too that they're researching some of this technology, and at March Air Force Base through Project Red Light.
Of this network of proposed facilities, one possible D.U.M.B stands out from the rest: Edwards Air Force Base. As mentioned in nearly every project, Edwards serves as home to the 412th Test Group, a major range and test facility base. Witness Ed, a vetted and accomplished USAF veteran, claimed Edwards and the Nevada Test and Training Range, specifically Nellis Air Force Base in Area 51/Groom Lake, which is actually run by an Edwards 412th detachment, runs a joint UFO reverse engineering program. Outside of the claims of Hamilton's informants regarding Edwards and craft stored in underground installations, there are many fascinating testimonies and avenues of research we might pursue. Remember how one source of Hamilton claimed to have worked on the anthill installation under Tejon in Antelope Valley? The source claimed the installation's command center existed under Edwards Haystack Butte. This sentiment is shared by the controversial and enigmatic whistleblower Dr. Michael Wolff, who claimed as a UAP consultant to the National Security Council he heard live extraterrestrials were kept under Haystack Butte, Edwards. Test facilities are built into and on Haystack Butte, east of Edwards. Indeed, these facilities are run alongside a primary field lab at the remote northeast corner of Edwards by the Air Force Research Lab's Aerospace Systems Directorate. AFRL, Edwards 412 Test Wing, and NASA Flight Research Facility work together at Edwards to plan, conduct, analyze, and report on all flight and ground testing of aircraft, weapon systems, software, and components, as well as modeling and simulation for the USAF. Since facilities are built into the butte, it is no stretch to assume locations are built under the Haystack Butte. And remember, this USAF AFRL Rocket Propulsion Division and their rocket test labs on Lumen Ridge were named by Hamilton and his informants as featuring a stiff location connected to the wider Edwards underground complex. This lab features a number of underground missile silos, but the extent to which the Air Force Propulsion Laboratory sprawls underground is unknown. However, and very interesting, numerous studies out of the Air Force Rocket Propulsion Lab have shown a heavy interest in anti-gravity propulsion. Is this location definitely UFO legacy related? Unknown. But a strong argument can be made from witness testimony. And lastly, a bit north to Antelope is China Lake Naval Air Weapons Station. As we showed in a 1964 Army Corps of Engineers study titled Feasibility of Constructing Large Underground Cavities, Inyo County, which shares territory with China Lake, was considered for underground purposes. The underground cavity of interest was 4,000 feet deep, and it is unknown if this facility was built. However, numerous witness testimony may give us some idea. As we also discussed above, Dr. Sauder had been given testimony by Navy veterans stationed at China Lake who not only claimed the facility goes 1 mile deep, but weapons work is conducted on, quote, weapons more powerful than nuclear weapons, end quote. Hamilton himself also had a source who allegedly served as an aerospace engineer consultant to NASA and colonel. This unnamed colonel claimed he worked at an underground installation at China Lake, Edwards Air Force Base, and the Nevada test site. These locations were, according to the source, connected via a Maglev train system from which he would often enter through a D.U.M.B beneath White Sands missile range. I put stock in this testimony due to speaking myself to a witness who claimed to travel via underground train system from a fort in Texas to White Sands. This source, an Army officer in the 2010s, claimed the train's speed and acceleration were so great it reminded him of his fear of flying. We also have Ed and the mention of Edwards and the NTTR. China Lake is not mentioned in his testimony, however it stands to reason the very near China Lake, which serves as the Navy's largest single land holding, representing 85% of the Navy's weapons and armaments RDT&E programs, could likely see crossover TUO programs with the USAF. If these programs exchange non-human craft, materials, and research, it stands to reason such transactions would be conducted underground to maintain secrecy. I would in the future like to do an entire video on China Lake, so hang tight. Corporate and military installations do indeed exist below Antelope Valley. Again, the question is, do these sites deal with technologies of unknown origin and exploitation programs? Antelope and Palmdale are home to aerospace juggernauts and myriad DoD, RDT&E, and MRTF-Bs, and have for decades featured numerous testimonies of ARV, underground installations, and claims of UFO legacy programs. Due to these factors, plus witnesses who have told me they have traveled below the Antelope Valley, I am inclined to conclude such an anthill, if so to speak, does in fact exist to work on UFO legacy programs. The vast majority of our focus today is the American Southwest and endless claims of underground UFO research in RDT&E, but quickly, I do want to look east. We have already discussed STFs used by the CIA and NSA under cover of the Army and Navy respectively, but what about UFO STFs? For this reason, I would like to look to the United States Capitol and address the Deep Underground Command Center. The DUCC was a STF below the Pentagon that was never built. However, I am not sure just how true that statement is. Now, an acknowledged STF under the Pentagon does indeed exist, the National Military Command Center, responsible for generating emergency action messages to missile control launch centers, nuclear subs, and battlefield commanders. This NMCC was set to serve as an interim facility for the never-built DUCC. The Deep Underground Command Center was first proposed in 1963, 3 weeks before the assassination of JFK. Declassified top-secret documents dated 7 November 63 detail former Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara proposing meetings to discuss the National Underground Command Center. These plans for the National or Deep Underground Command Center detailed a complex command center built 3,500 feet below Washington, D.C. This location would be built to withstand direct hits of 200 to 300 megaton warheads that penetrate 70 to 100 feet below the surface before detonation. 2 separate facilities were proposed, an austere facility with 10,000 total square feet and 5,000 operating square feet accommodating 40 people at a depth of 3,500 feet. This would cost over $110 million or $1.1 billion today. The second was a moderate-sized facility with 100,000 total square feet and 50,000 operating square feet accommodating 300 people at a depth of 3,500 feet. This would cost $310 million or over $3.2 billion today. The Joint Chiefs interestingly proposed the austere facility to be too small. The operation capsule of the center would be near the Pentagon, and an access elevator would descend 3,500 feet underground from the Pentagon to the installation. This may seem like a massive undertaking, however, the memorandum stated, quote, "There is little argument that the construction of a DUCC is technically feasible," end quote. To quote the memo again, quote, "The nature of the DUCC, regardless of the initial size selected, lends itself to later expansion," end quote. Once Lyndon B. Johnson took office, a second memorandum was issued 16 January 1964 from Wal Rostow to McGeorge Bundy stating the DUCC concept should proceed. Rostow served as a senior advisor to both Kennedy and Johnson. An additional memo followed the same day from McGeorge Bundy to Carl Kaysen, showing planning for the DUCC had been going forward since the early days of the Johnson admin. Kaysen was Deputy Special Assistant for National Security Affairs to Kennedy and possibly stayed on to advise on the DUCC program. The memo additionally stated Kaysen having spoken to Harold Brown re the DUCC. Brown served as Director of Defense Research and Engineering from 1961 to 1965. A last top-secret memo dealing with the DUCC was issued by the Bureau of the Budget, estimated between 1963 to 1964. 40+% of this document is redacted. Was the DUCC ever built? Conventional sources would say no, however, I would argue indeed it was. This confidence of mine is from sources who have described to me first-hand encounters within an enormous cavernous facility below the Pentagon. But how does such a proposed facility deal with the subject of UFOs? If the DUCC was indeed built, it is a publicly denied site. Therefore, we can feasibly reckon if the site does exist, it deals with subjects critical to U.S. national security. Since the 1954 Atomic Energy Agreement, materials pertaining to UFOs have been misclassified as transclassified foreign nuclear materials. As relayed by physicist Robert Sarbacher in 1950, UFO programs exist and their classification resides even higher than that of the H-bomb. On this channel, I have spoken in depth that UFO legacy program operations are the ultimate secret, deep-sixed, clandestine set of programs deeply embedded within special access programs. The Pentagon resides near Crystal City. Crystal City features 8 of 10 of the US's top defense contractors, and the small neighborhood is where 2/3 of federal contracts are awarded by value. This location holds primary offices held by Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Raytheon, General Dynamics, L3, Aerojet Rocketdyne, and more, all contractors I highly suspect engage with UFO programs. The neighborhood also holds or is in close proximity to numerous FFRDCs I believe are up to their eyeballs in UFO programs. These include the Center for Naval Analyses, Institute for Defense Analysis, Aerospace Corporation, and RAND Homeland Security Operations Analysis Center. Additionally, Crystal City is home to myriad DoD research agencies including DARPA, Office of Naval Research, and Air Force Office of Scientific Research. I do believe, similar to the Antelope Valley, Crystal City's amalgamation of DoD entities, FFRDCs, and contractors is a major center of operations for UFO legacy programs. Perhaps due to limited airspace and usage of MRTFBs, unlike the American desert and Southwest, Crystal City is where the majority of UFO-related USAPs are created, maintained, and kept secure. This is a thesis I will continue to explore in depth in the future. If Crystal City does indeed majorly engage with clandestine UFO unacknowledged special access programs, it stands to reason such a classified effort involving DoD, private, and semi-private entities would require a massive underground facility. The idea of a major network of underground tunnels connecting D.U.M.Bs nationwide is often scoffed at. I have no idea if the entire nation's STFs are connected via tunnel system, but a strong argument can be made complex systems of interconnecting STFs exist in the American Southwest and East Coast. After all, in a document obtained via FOIA by Dr. Richard Sauder, we even have hard numbers from the military-industrial complex of the estimated number of total personnel needed to build and operate a deeply buried hundreds of mile-long tunnel system. And this is the order of 7,800 to 8,700 people. And we also have a hard estimate for the total expenses associated with constructing, operating, and maintaining such a system, the neighborhood of $17 billion over a 10-year period. Many such acknowledged tunnel systems exist, like the Department of Energy's sprawling tunnel network below the Nevada Test and Training Range, but let's continue to explore the feasibility of massive tunnel systems connecting bases dozens or hundreds of miles apart. The technology for such undertakings does indeed exist. The most likely candidates are nuclear submarines and tunnel boring machines. Tunnel boring machines are huge cylindrical mechanical boring machines that tunnel through rock and soil, chewing out circular tunnels that may range in diameter of up to 35 or more feet. These Goliaths are powered by electrical motors that have a cutting head equipped with various metal attachments made of super hard alloys that cut through rock as the head rotates. The head rotates and the cutting tools dig into the rock, ripping and gouging it away. The excavated rock or muck is then passed by a conveyor assembly to the rear of the machine where it can be hauled away by truck or train. According to the Pacific Gas and Electric Company, utilizing a Robbins Company TBM to bore a 22,000-foot long, 24-foot diameter tunnel, it took a rate of 5 to 6 miles per year. However, in better conditions, some TBMs could bore at a rate of 10 miles per year or greater, roughly double the rate of the Pacific Gas and Electric Company. This would mean D.U.M.Bs below China Lake and Edwards could be connected in as little as 5.5 years. Nuclear submarines were originally designed by Los Alamos National Lab. Sound familiar? The patents for such machines were filed, technical documents were written, but the project seemingly faded into obscurity. These fascinating machines work by melting through rock and soil, leaving neat, solidly glass-lined tunnels by vitrifying materials. Heat is supplied to the system via compact nuclear reactors that circulate liquid lithium from the reactor core to the tunnel face, melting rock in front of the machine. Cooled liquid lithium then circulates to the back of the machine alongside the exterior of the machine to cool surrounding rock as the machine is forced forward. Patents were first proposed by the Atomic Energy Commission and U.S. Energy R&D in 1972 and 1975. Further nuclear submarine patents in 1975 detailed tunnel systems of 12 meters or more in diameter. All but one of the inventors listed in the 3 patents above were from Los Alamos. Additionally, a 1973 Los Alamos study titled Systems and Cost Analysis for a Nuclear Submarine Tunnel Machine, a preliminary study, concluded nuclear submarines to be a cost-efficient solution to satisfy U.S. transportation tunnel demands. Similar to how we deduced numerous D.U.M.Bs were built around 1961 to 1989, we can make similar deductions regarding connective tunnel systems. If such an enormous tunnel system exists, it likely saw construction beginning around the early 1970s, 1974 to be exact. The Bechtel Corporation is an American engineering, procurement, and construction management company founded in the U.S. Bechtel has often been targeted as one of the U.S. corporations responsible for D.U.M.B tunnel systems. In 1974, Bechtel released a report titled Research Program Plan for Meeting Tomorrow's Needs in Tunneling and Excavation Final Report. This report states, quote, "The demand for tunneling and underground excavation for national defense needs is believed to be large. Some examples of underground defense facilities include hard rock silos, command posts, communication systems, personnel shelters, storage and power generation facilities," end quote. Interestingly enough, the same report shows a massive list of novel ground disintegration techniques in R&D stages. In 1972, the governing board of the National Research Council formed the U.S. National Committee on Tunneling Technology. This committee functioned as the, quote, "United States focal agency in the field of tunneling technology, to assess and stimulate improvements in tunneling technology applications and to coordinate U.S. tunneling technology activities with those of other nations," end quote. By 1977, this USNTT had 6 major subcommittees, including the Deep Cavity and Tunnel Support Systems Committees. USNCTT partnered with numerous corporations, agencies, and academics of particular interest to this channel. These include both Sandia National Labs and Bechtel Memorial Institute. I have accused Bechtel of engaging deeply with UAP legacy programs, including operations at the Dugway D.U.M.B. In 1981 and 1982, the USNCTT sponsored a project called Workshop on Technology for the Design and Construction of Deep Underground Defense Facilities. This was done at the behest of the Nuclear Defense Agency, and co-sponsors included the Bureau of Reclamation, Army, USAF, Navy, DOE, and National Science Foundation, including others. The 1982 report of the workshop detailed the need for 400 miles of tunnels ranging from 2,500 to 3,500 feet for various purposes, including housing nuclear missiles. These tunnels were to be up to 16 feet in diameter with, quote, "interconnecting passageways and adits, horizontal passageways, for storage, living quarters, and other needs," end quote. The location of such a network of tunnels, according to the New York Times, would be, quote, "probably in the desert of the western United States." Such tunnels and installations were to be powered via fuel cells or nuclear reactors, and as we saw in 1963, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers was very serious about nuclear reactors powering self-contained underground installations. Fuel cells may also be of special interest here, seen as in 1984, Boeing published the results of a study that set forth plans for power generation in deep ICBM bases using iron chlorine fuel cells to generate power. The USNCTT called for mobilization of this plan in the late 80s and early 90s. The committee called for tunnel boring machines to be utilized starting in 1985 for carving tunnel systems. By 1988, USNCTT was publishing reports titled Tunneling and Underground Space Technology, discussing underground missile systems ranging between 3,000 to 8,000 feet underground. During this period in the 80s, numerous contractors I have directly accused of being involved in UFO legacy programs would aid in the construction of deep underground missile bases and tunnel systems. Of course, we must assume some, if not many, underground nuclear missile bases may have served as clandestine RDT&E facilities. This should not come as a shock, as we have already discussed U.S. intelligence agencies utilizing underground military sites for secret operations. Such corporations include BDM, who was awarded in 1985 a contract to conduct, quote, intercontinental ballistic missile deep basing communication study, end quote, as well as TRW, who had since 1968 been involved in studies into high-speed ground transportation tunnel design and cost analysis. Both corporations were later on bought by Northrop Grumman. The 1985 BDM study is of particular interest here. Remember, if you will, earlier that same year, 20 to 25 May 1985 to be exact, BDM McLean also held the Advanced Theoretical Physics Conference. The meetings of this exclusive group were classified utilizing DOE controls. Notes of this conference were released by attendee Oki Shannon, who formerly served as manager for special projects at Los Alamos National Labs. This McLean, Virginia secure facility group discussed myriad aspects of UFOs, including legacy programs and a major engineering project under Bobby Ray Inman. Viewers of my channel will absolutely recall Inman mentioned often as a senior UFO legacy operations member. At this time, the vice president of BDM was former Major General and founder of U.S. Army INSCOM Albert Stubblebine. Stubblebine will be mentioned again in this project, including how he was accused of engaging in UFO craft storage and material exploitation while head of Army intelligence at Fort Huachuca, Arizona. Interestingly, the Advanced Theoretical Working Group was spearheaded by U.S. Army Colonel John B. Alexander, who from 1982 to 1983 reported directly to Stubblebine. Additionally, recall how Philip J. Corso claimed a UFO working group was established in the mid-80s. According to Corso, this group saw ample funding from U.S. Army INSCOM General Stubblebine. It is interesting to think of possible ties between this ICBM deep basing communication study and Albert Stubblebine and the Advanced Theoretical Physics Conference and a possible UFO working group accused by Philip J. Corso. Throughout the 1980s, U.S. industry and government additionally demonstrated a keen interest in life support systems for massive tunnel systems, underground ICBM installations, as well as deep, and I mean deep, underground bases. This can be demonstrated in a November 1985 contract to Unitech Technologies, Hamilton Standard Division, for life support and chemical biological agent mitigation system on small ICBM deep basing programs, end quote. U.S. Army Corps of Engineers as well as USNCTT have even discussed provable technologies, times, and prices to construct such massive tunnel systems. Yet no data exists on any large-scale tunneling project. This may force us to look deeper, like at the low-profile records of the Bureau of Reclamation, who during the 20th century excavated hundreds of miles of tunnels up to 28.5 feet in diameter, at depths of hundreds to thousands of feet. Quite often, the Bureau would utilize classic tunnel boring machines. Numerous inside sources to Dr. Richard Sauder have informed him that some of the Bureau of Reclamation's tunnels have doubled as cover for other clandestine underground tunnels. To quote underground and underwater bases, quote, "From a hypothetical point of view, what is to stop a tunnel boring machine from tunneling off of an aqueduct tunnel deep underground and striking out secretly to make a clandestine tunnel? It takes about 10 men to operate a TBM, and in good rock you can count on as much as 15 miles of tunnel per year," end quote. For decades, rumors of underground railroad systems, specifically maglev trains, have been inseparable from testimony regarding D.U.M.Bs and UFOs. As we discussed earlier in the Antelope Valley section, such a concept was relayed to UFO researcher Bill Hamilton by some of his many informants. But just how true are these rumors of a high-speed electromagnetic railroad system often described as a pneumatic system, aka a train system operating in a partial vacuum tube? To begin, what is maglev? Maglev trains are a type of rail system levitated by electromagnetics rather than employing wheels. Maglevs feature numerous benefits to conventional railroad systems, including higher speeds, superior acceleration and deceleration, lower maintenance costs, improved gradient handling, and lower noise, but are much more expensive compared to traditional systems. Maglevs have even reached top speeds of 375 miles per hour. And pneumatic tube trains are an early form of transportation or air vacuum to move containers or vehicles through tubes while minimizing friction. New York's first subway system was an underground pneumatic tube transport line created by Alfred Eli Beach. Earlier in this project, we spoke of Nazi scientists being sequestered by Air Materiel Command in the US to work on underground complexes. I would also like to draw attention to Hermann Kemper. Kemper was a Third Reich engineer who created a concept for the Rohrbahn. The Rohrbahn was a system of magnetic levitation trains designed to speed through underground vacuum tunnels at hundreds or even thousands of miles per hour. Suspended passenger cars on magnetic fields would be propelled through tunnels, negating any friction of wheels, rails, and air. Kemper's research began in 1934. By 1938, he envisioned Berlin connected to other European cities with cars traveling at 600 to 1,000 miles per hour. It is unknown how far the Nazis pursued this concept, nor is it known if Kemper was recruited by Operation Paperclip. A feasible hypothesis here is Kemper was contracted by the US to help build early iterations of maglev pneumatic systems. Maglev, UFOs, and D.U.M.Bs are often lumped together as conspiracy. However, maglevs are not a niche concept. Since the 1960s, maglev technology has seen numerous patents, and by the year 2000, even Lockheed Martin entered into agreements with Trans Rapid International USA to develop maglev technology in the US. In fact, by the early 1990s, an acknowledged multi-agency National Maglev Institute was formed. This joint effort by the DOE and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers sought to, quote, define the role maglev could play in U.S. transportation system, to assess the potential for maglev in the domestic market. to recommend a strategy for the introduction of maglev technology and to identify the most appropriate federal role, end quote. This NMI published a report in the early 90s titled Compendium of Executive Summaries from the Maglev System Concept Definition Final Reports. This series of reports sought to determine nationwide maglev system availability by the year 2000. Some interesting players appear in this document. This includes a joint project with Bechtel, Hughes Aircraft, and MIT, which employs a UARC for the Army. A second report saw work by Boeing Aerospace and General Dynamics to study superconducting levitation. To top this off, a third study saw joint efforts into superconducting magnets performed by Grumman Corporation pre-Northrop, Bechtel Memorial Labs, and Honeywell. All contractors mentioned above in above-board maglev technology research I highly suspect have for decades attempted the reverse engineering and material exploitation of non-human craft. However, rumors of clandestine maglev systems far precede the 1990s and 2000s. Dr. Richard Sauder as well as Bill Hamilton first heard whispers of such systems in the 1980s. Sauder himself referenced reading reports of underground rail systems to Area 51 from Mercury, Nevada, and the Naval Surface Warfare Center Corona Division. Discussion of these rail systems would even pop up in online UFO forums around 1997. Look at the name on the top of these testimony reports, A.J. Craddock. In discussed in the Dugway project, Craddock is an oil tycoon operating in Libya that helped Stephen Greer in the 1990s with Sea SETI. Craddock brought Greer, in my opinion, incredibly valuable and relevant information regarding Area 51 moving many UFO operations to Dugway. So if maglev systems existed far before UFO Legacy Program defense contractors engaged with the acknowledged National Maglev Institute, where and when might these systems have been developed, and of what technology? The mid-1960s saw established engineering professors from the Office of Naval Research, Army Research Office, and Booz Allen Hamilton establish the International Society for Terrain Vehicle Systems, or ISTV. Real quick, in the mid to late 20th century, I believe Booz Allen Hamilton was as involved in UFO legacy operations as Northrop Grumman is today, but that's another project for another day. The ISTVS working group coordinated research around high-speed underground tube train systems. At the same time of the ISTVS, the U.S. Department of Commerce established a multi-agency panel focused on high-speed underground tube train systems. The panel produced a 1967 report titled R&D for High-Speed Ground Transportation, which states, quote, "Regardless of the system adopted, it can be assumed that extensive tunneling will be involved. It is recommended that the department cooperate closely with other agencies in planning and funding research into this area to provide an extra stimulus for rapid development," end quote. Of massive consequence to this investigation, in 1972, Robert Salter of the RAND Corporation published a study titled The Very High Speed Transit System. In this study, RAND set out a continental deep underground concept that was described as, quote, "electromagnetically levitated and propelled cars in an evacuated tunnel," end quote. The study makes some truly shocking statements, including, quote, "Speeds as high as 14,000 miles per hour have been examined in studies by the RAND Corporation." In an example case of a direct link between Los Angeles and New York requiring only 21 minutes of transit time, "the speeds required will certainly be on the order of thousands of miles per hour on long-haul links," end quote. I believe Salter additionally makes a critical statement that lends strongly towards the subject of UFO legacy D.U.M.Bs. Salter states, quote, "Because of the rather considerable expanse of the tunnel, it is probable that the first VHST will not rely on a direct non-stop LA-NY link, but rather one that stops at two intermediate staging points," end quote. These intermediate staging points are apparent when throughout this video I have made and will continue to make in the Hamilton map segment the argument that UFO D.U.M.B networks feature central hubs. These hubs, if so to speak, are connected to one another and branch to local smaller D.U.M.B facilities. Think of a railway central station connecting to other major stations while also featuring alternative lines to small local stops. Much of this technology was based on work conducted by Robert Goddard, father of modern rocketry's 1945 vacuum tube transport system, as well as Michael Minovich, the physicist behind introducing gravity-assisted propulsion around planetary bodies' 1961 work Deep Underground Tube Shuttle. Salter and Rand strongly recommended placing the VHST underground to remove interference with environmental factors such as grade crossings, weather, and infrastructure, and also observed that it was not appreciably harder to tunnel at great lengths underground than at shallow depths. Within this study is a map of the proposed VHST that corresponds strongly to Bill Hamilton's alleged Western State D.U.M.B network, but more on this later. Around a similar timeframe to this Rand study is the High-Speed Ground Transportation Initiative. This group became operational in the 1960s, performing most of their work in the 1970s before slipping out of public view in the 1980s. For a period of 10 to 15 years, the United States saw enormous efforts into R&D and feasibility and desirability of high-speed underground tube shuttle train systems. Entities involved in this program are countless, including TRW, General Dynamics, MIT, Southwest Research Institute behind Project Stargate, General Electric, NASA, Army, Navy, and Bechtel Memorial Institute. I have mentioned some of the work published under this initiative before, including TRW's 1967 study titled Abstracts of Concepts of High-Speed Ground Transportation Systems. Remember, TRW was purchased by Northrop Grumman and long considered as the contractor behind the Majestic 12-like entity Project Zodiac. For the High-Speed Ground Transportation Initiative, TRW additionally prepared a study titled State-of-the-Art Tube Vehicle System in 1970. This study discussed tube systems in tunnels as deep as 3,000 feet underground using trains that would travel at speeds of 450 miles per hour. Similar to the D.U.M.B tunnel concept, no admission of maglevs connecting STFs is publicly available. However, there is an overwhelming body of historical evidence the U.S. and defense contractors have had a keen interest in high-speed underground transit systems traveling at least as fast as a commercial airliner. To close off our investigation, I would like to return to 1992's Cosmic Top Secret by Bill Hamilton. In this masterpiece of a book, Hamilton provides a map of underground facilities and tunnels provided to him by one TAL in 1990. Some data here is from Thomas C., aka Thomas Castillo, which is an extremely controversial source with the Dulce, New Mexico story, so instead, let's go ahead and analyze the map. This network spans the American West and Southwest, with major installations listed in Southern California, New Mexico, and Colorado. As expected earlier, we find Edwards Air Force Base connected to myriad locations including numerous small marks labeled R&D. We also see a supposed underground base marked CAT. This is of course Catalina Island. Fascinating how in 2023 and 2024, discussion began to swirl of an underground extraterrestrial or human base off of Catalina Island. We also see Area 51 as a major reference with connections to Tonopah, an installation infamous in UFO lore as well. We also find interesting solo marked D.U.M.Bs not connected in this alleged system, including Fort Huachuca, Arizona, a location I estimate is involved heavily in UFO programs. Remember, if you will, Fort Huachuca holds a defense agency major range and test facility base, a critical core facility called the Joint Interoperability Center. Army intelligence at Fort Huachuca was previously run by U.S. Army INSCOM founder Major General Albert Stubblebine. Stubblebine and INSCOM have been accused by myself in numerous projects amongst others as engaging in UFO crash retrieval, storage, and material exploitation. Therefore, it is really no surprise to see Hamilton's map designate Fort Huachuca as a D.U.M.B location. On the map are many locations in New Mexico, including the controversial Dulce, Los Alamos, and Sandia/Kirtland. The latter two we know have underground facilities, indeed the same extends to Cheyenne in Colorado. Intriguing to note here is an installation in Chihuahua, Mexico. This subject wouldn't be touched on again until Jake Barber's Romana Clay called Sentinels of Ether. This project describes a 2004 blue-on-blue UFO retrieval team fire operation in which the clandestine team flew into a disguised base hidden in the mountains of Chihuahua. What happens when we start to compare this map to others? See now a comparison between Hamilton's D.U.M.B network and Rand's VHST. See the interesting direct route shared across the two maps through the northern area of Arizona and New Mexico. Additionally, observe how Southern California sees routes split to both Southern California near San Diego and Northern California near Sacramento before continuing north to Portland and Washington. Also notice connections to Denver on both locations. Outside of Cheyenne Mountain Complex, Denver, Colorado is home to an enormous underground FEMA complex. This is likely a continuity of government or COG complex. My true interest lies in comparing the Hamilton piece to defense laboratories and centers across the United States. Here we will not find Groom Lake amongst other select facilities, but I believe this comparison is of critical importance. If you will, please forgive the maps not lining up. The 1990 map is scaled differently than the 2019 DoD map, so the two are not merged to scale perfectly. Aligning the two maps brings extreme interest to both D.U.M.B locations as well as markings on the Hamilton piece that are labeled R&D. Since this map pertains to connected underground UFO installations, we can assume by the map's legend these locations do not employ D.U.M.Bs but are still focused on UFO legacy R&D. As expected, Southern California brings a massive amount of locations of interest. Even outside of the Antelope Valley to the southwest in Los Angeles lies a tremendous amount of DoD RDT&E labs, FFRDCs like RAND and Aerospace Corporations, and UARCs like the USC Institute for Creative Technologies. Numerous other locations outside of the Antelope line up between the two maps we have discussed throughout this investigation, including Fort Huachuca, Cheyenne Mountain, Colorado, Dugway and its two MRTFBs, Los Alamos, White Sands Missile Range, Sandia, and Kirtland Air Force Base. From referencing DoD labs, we can also learn Kirtland and its proven underground facilities stand out even more. Kirtland additionally holds the Air Force Research Lab's Space Vehicles Directorate and Directed Energy Directorate. Of note shared on these maps, albeit slightly shifted, is the 4th Defense Estate microelectronics activity in Northern California. In DoD terms, 4th Estate describes non-military parts of the DoD. These include the Defense Contract Audit Agency, Defense Contract Management Agency, and the Defense Finance and Accounting Service. 4th Estate agencies and field activities all watching this video might recognize are DARPA and the Defense Missile Agency. Prior to this investigation, I had never come across mention of a D.U.M.B below the DMEA, so this is a terrific point of research moving forward. Let's also reference more of the non-connected R&D locations on Hamilton's map that exist as acknowledged DoD RDT&E facilities. In Nebraska, on both maps, we find identification of the U.S. STRATCOM University-affiliated research center, the University of Nebraska National Strategic Research Institute. Viewers of my work know UARCs and FFRDCs are cornerstones of UAP legacy programs, so it is interesting to see Hamilton identify a UARC as a UFO R&D location all the way back in 1992 that would not be founded until 2012. In Oklahoma, we observe Fort Sill as UFO R&D and the Naval Surface Warfare Center Indian Head Special Weapons Division McAllister Detachment as UFO storage. I have come across both of these locations in my research, however, it is interesting to see an NSWC location labeled as storage, especially after the testimony of Randy Anderson and the Off-World Technologies Division at the Naval Surface Warfare Center Crane. In northern Kansas, we observe overlap of a UFO research facility. This facility is the U.S. Army Leavenworth Research Unit. In Texas, we find Fort Hood Army Research Unit as a UFO research location. However, it is interesting to see this facility is not marked as a STF, especially after numerous testimony relayed by and research done by Leonard Stringfield. The Hamilton map deserves an entire investigation of its own, and possibly I will do so with Dr. Sauder. Because after all, this map does accuse D.U.M.Bs of existing at all locations we have previously discussed, as well as many that warrant further investigation, including Fort Stockton, Fort Irwin, Vandenberg AFB, Chocolate Mountains Aerial Gunnery Range, 29 Palms, Hutchinson Air Force Station, and Peterson Air Force Base, as well as the cities of Kingsley, Nebraska, Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Riverton, Wyoming. I have spoken to Dr. Sauder, and he has spoken directly with Bill Hamilton regarding this map, so just maybe he can aid in further dissecting of these locations. Hey guys, it's Gerb, and if you're still with me, thank you so much for joining me in this, at this point, hour 20, hour and a half investigation into D.U.M.Bs. As many of you know, and as many people have been looking forward to this project, D.U.M.Bs are a passion project of mine. I speak about installations under Dugway, under the Antelope Valley, under the Northrop Tejon and Helendale facilities, In numerous videos, I think probably my last 4 videos straight, I've mentioned one, if not multiple of these locations. As we made it to the end of this video, I'd like to thank again Dr. Richard Sauder for all of his excellent research. Now, this video is going to be doing things a little bit differently. Of course, in every single one of my videos, I include my show notes in the video description or a link. Please bear with me a couple days here, as I have not only compiled my research links for this video, but also every single document that I can find that Dr. Richard Sauder has included in his 3 books. So every single defense technical document, every single Army Corps of Engineer document, every single document I could find, which there's hundreds. So please allow me a couple days to compile all that and deliver that, because I think it's excellent to read through all of those. And please read through Dr. Richard Sauder's books. They're excellent. As we know from today, the subject of D.U.M.Bs is very vast. It's almost impossible to know where and when to start. There is a tremendous amount of literature on deep underground facilities for continuity of government use, for ICBM silos, for just general underground installations accessible by vertical or inclined shaft. There's also a tremendous amount of information, specifically starting post-1974 with Bechtel, on large-scale tunneling systems and conventional and unconventional blasting methods. This would be a tunnel boring machine or a nuclear subterrane as a conventional method, or explosives or possibly nuclear detonation as unconventional. And also a lot of literature on Maglev technology. I know these 3 subjects of interconnected D.U.M.B bases are often scoffed at without a lot of research, but this is a very serious subject, and at least I would say focused in the Southwest and the American desert and the East, there are probably large networks of D.U.M.Bs. This would include New Mexico, Arizona, Southern California, possibly up to connecting to Dugway and Colorado, and then a network out east, including the Warrenton Army Training Facility, Camp Peary, Camp David, the D.U.C.C., which I wager highly exists, and so forth. Now, of course, let's treat this video as a part 1. A part 2 will be a project with Dr. Richard Sauder. I spoke to him the other week for about 2 to 3 hours, and he graciously agreed to come on the show and talk more about D.U.M.Bs. I think what's really interesting here is there are numerous informants, just like Bill Hamilton had, that have told him about installations and facilities, and perhaps he can tell those on our project together and relay them, because he said some to me in our conversations that he hasn't repeated publicly that are indeed quite interesting. Also, when Bill Hamilton was still alive, Dr. Richard Sauder talked to him at length about his network of D.U.M.Bs maps. So possibly for an hour, hour and a half, we will dive into that. So please look forward to a Dr. Richard Sauder project coming in the future, and please also look forward to the show notes. You know, another thing I'm doing is I'm planning to build a website. No sign up needed. It's not the DPI archive, but I'm planning to put up a website where I have videos, transcripts of the videos, and all research links. So I'd like to put those there. The only reason I plan to do this is to make it easier to access all the materials I put forth with my research. But I want to know what everybody thinks about D.U.M.Bs, specifically networks of D.U.M.Bs. D.U.M.Bs are not a controversial thing. D.U.M.Bs do indeed exist. And from numerous testimony, whether that be Leonard Stringfield, whether that be testimony to Sauder, to Hamilton, to myself, there is an incredible argument that many of these facilities, D.U.M.B facilities, engage in UAP legacy programs. I like to think back to the testimony of MS, for example, which led to a tremendously fruitful venture into the D.U.M.B under Dugway. And of course, we even have a specific entrance to that facility. Other research from other informants can be done on this. Another thing I did differently in this project, of course, is I hardly interject when witnesses have spoken to me about testimony or given me testimony. I thought it prudent in this investigation just when speaking about various D.U.M.B facilities. And to summarize, these include: I've spoken to individuals who have been in networks under the Antelope Valley, in location under Texas that connected via underground train that went so fast it reminded this Army veteran of his fear of flying, to White Sands Missile Range, as well as the what we might call the Deep Underground Command Center out east. This is a location deep under the Pentagon. How deep, I don't know. However, I have good insight. This is a facility, or at least there are facilities here that are run by the CIA Directorate of Science and Technology. If that sounds familiar to you, that was the CIA office that blocked the material transfer in 2008 from Lockheed Martin to the OSAP program, and that was the 1953 Kingman crash. But the networks of D.U.M.Bs are what are so interesting to me. For example, hearkening back to the story of Ed and the Nevada Test and Training Range and Edwards Air Force Base, there's other testimony about connections in bases in Southern California to Area 51, Tonopah, the Nevada Test and Training Range. If I could ever get Ed to sit down in a room, and believe me, I've tried to speak to him, the first thing I would ask him if there's connective tunneling systems and what type of vehicles, if there are, that connect these two places. Now, absent in this video, of course, I talked about in the beginning, are the stories of Bob Lazar, the stories of Dulcie Bass and Thomas Castillo, and the story of Phil Schneider. I believe that these witnesses, these subjects are very controversial, so I didn't include them because of their controversy, but because when I have such controversial claims, I think it prudent to investigate those and vet those and try to determine any sort of objective information from those when we can. So, you know, S4, for example, I do believe S4 is a facility that does indeed exist. Does it have extraterrestrial or non-human technology? I don't know. An individual I've spoken to that went to S4 talked about colored lines where to walk, but he didn't see anything that would say non-human technology. But then again, he was not privy to the entire base. But because of that, I would like to focus on subjects like S4, maybe Dulcie Base, and maybe other locations as well. And I will do those in a separate project. With this project, I wanted to take as objective of an approach as I could. I wanted to combine the facts we know about D.U.M.Bs, about tunnel systems, about maglev systems, and relay those to stories of the Antelope Valley, stories of locations out east. I mean, there is a tremendous amount of facilities I didn't get to cover here that I would like to revisit. So again, as I spoke about in the project with Dr. Richard Sauder, this is just kind of a taste into D.U.M.Bs. I do think this is one of the most consequential subjects of UFO legacy programs. You know, like I said, and I'll say it again, most underground facilities, as we see from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and other documents, were first proposed as a continuity of government, a COG, or a ICBM silo facility. And we know that is partially true in the large FEMA underground center near Denver, Colorado, which everybody knows I'm from Colorado, so that's near where I am. So the clandestine operation, when did these start? As we talked about the D.U.M.Bs, there's a good argument that in post-1961, when the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers really started to look into underground facilities, massive ones ranging up to in some documents 8,000 feet underground into the late 90s. I think this is when the vast majority of underground installations were built. When were the connective tunnels built? If these do exist, which I believe many locations do feature connective tunnels. This, of course, as we saw in the Bechtel report with conventional and unconventional tunneling methods, probably started around 1974. Between 1972 and 1974, a whole host of tunneling committees and institutes were set up to investigate massive tunneling systems. And of course, following in the 80s into the 90s, we see the same thing with maglev technology. So I think the order of operations here is likely the D.U.M.B is built. Maybe a decade later, connective tunnels are built. And maybe a decade after that, the full train systems are implemented. I mean, in the 90s, we see the National Maglev Institute, and we see corporations like Grumman, like General Dynamics, like Bechtel, doing above-board maglev research. So this could likely imply they had been doing clandestine research into similar projects into electromagnetics long before then. So it's an incredibly fascinating subject, especially when you start to look at the Bureau of Reclamation and what Dr. Sauder has relayed from his informants about the Bureau of Reclamation. This was possibly an above-board tunneling system in the American Southwest that featured clandestine secondary tunnels to bore out whatever was needed. And as we saw in the list I scrolled through, there are hundreds of tunnels from the BOR that in the mid to late 20th century, and some of these are hundreds of miles long, some of these are thousands, and they range in depths from just underground to up to near 1,000 feet. So when Dr. Sauder's informant relayed to him that 10 men can operate a TBM, and a good TBM in good conditions can chew through up to 10 miles per year, I do think this is a likely candidate. You know, this harkens back to other UFO legacy program funding operations, how we what we can make educated guesses via IRAD, sole source contracts, IDIQ, and utilizing legitimate contracts to skim off funds for UFO legacy programs. Now, again, I want to know what everybody thinks. If there are people here who have been to underground facilities, massive, deep underground facilities, please reach out to me. I would love to hear about your experience. I will respect your anonymity. But if you have a location, a facility to describe, or an experience in such a facility, please reach out to me. I would love to talk to you. But again, guys, let me know in the comments what you think. This has been a long spiel, almost 11 minutes. I think I've rambled quite a bit. Please remember to like and subscribe on the video. And remember, guys, I do have a Patreon. I don't gatekeep my content. In my opinion, this might be stubborn or this might be a bit narcissistic. I think the content is important to view. So I'm not going to gatekeep anything because I would like all of my research, all of my projects, and all of my research materials to be publicly available to anybody. So the Patreon is there to support what you think the channel is worth, not to lock off any content. So with that, guys, I have a couple projects coming up I'm really darn excited about. I'm trying to think about how I'm going to juggle these, but about 3 projects on the immediate mind I'm already working on, and that includes the project with Dr. Richard Sauder. So I will catch everybody soon, and thank you so very much for joining me. Bye now.